Welcome back. This is what I'm going to call Happy Hour here at our series Explore Ecstatic Sensuality. And in celebration of Happy Hour, I'm going to take a slug of my drink, which I highly encourage anyone interested in, having some nice liquid, which is green tea, ginseng, and just a dollop, just a smidge, just a tad of tang. Hits the spot. People used to talk about spots a lot when they talk about sex. Interesting thing that they did. So, I want to begin with a little bit of a review of something from episode 4, the last one we did. You may recall that we talked about the whole idea of part-object. We started with the idea of object relations as a theory of psychology that broke off in the early days of Freudianism, psychoanalysis, from ego psychology, which was Anna Freud's bailiwick. And what happened was Schondorfer and she, a compatriot of Freud, contemporary of Freud, came up with the notion of what he called object relations, and this was immediately or shortly thereafter taken up with some British psychologists, psychotherapists. One of the earliest ones, and one of the foremost ones, being Melanie Klein. And Melanie Klein said that in early childhood, in infancy, the child experiences, the infant experiences, the mother first through her breast, because it is something that provides comfort and very especially nourishment, nutrition for the child. Now, when that child encounters this particular feeding breast, the comforting breast, in the child's conception, this is the good breast. It's obviously the good breast. It's there for the child. But that breast is not always there. Sometimes that breast is absent. And the child develops a conception of the absent breast as something else. It's the bad breast. So Melanie Klein called this early phase of infancy the paranoid schizoid phase. What did she mean? Why did she use these words? Paranoid. Paranoid because the infant has a fear that the good breast will never return, that the only breast that will be available is the unavailable breast, the bad breast, the breast that is desired in the mind but is not there. So it's paranoid because the child is fearsome, fearful, and it's schizoid because the ego is split, the mind is split. Paranoid schizoid. And it is only later in the infant's life, that the child learns to integrate these two aspects of the breast, the paranoid schizoid phase of the breast and the breast that is there, into a whole. And certain psychologists, psychoanalysts, including Donald Winnicott, but especially Wilfred Bion and others, have argued that throughout life we're always in a certain way engaged in this process with things and people that we encounter and objects. We are viewing objects and people as part objects, and then going back and forth between the part object relation and the whole object relation, the paranoid schizoid position and the so-called depressive position, or relating to the whole object. Now, this is highly significant, and you may not get it at the very beginning, but we talked about it a little bit last time, in relating to one's significant other, mate, lover, person one is interested in, person one is attracted to, as a potential one of those things. Because, in my opinion, it is very important, as much as the part object may have appeal. The part object could be part of the person's body or all of the person's body. In a certain way, the physical attributes of a person are a part object, because the whole person is a lot bigger simply than those physical attributes of things that you can suck and lick and have your organs intermingle with directly. The whole object, the so-called depressive position of looking at the object of your lover, your significant other, your partner or your mate, is the whole person, not just the part object. Why do I bring this up? Because as we make love, or even in situations that are perhaps leading sensory situations, sensuous flirtation. Flirtation. I flirt all the time. I shouldn't do it as much as I do. I was just doing it the other night. Oh dear. So anyway, the important thing is to not let that split take place, and know the whole object, know the whole person. Not just be fondling a body, which is nice, but when you fondle a body, it should be the entire person whom you are fondling. One thing it strikes me as extremely good in terms of discussing not only sensuality but relationships in general is that the good part of your lover, your mate, your significant other, for a woman, he's a good provider. He's a good dad. He keeps the car running. He is good at financial things. He's got a good job. He's handy around the house. No one ever accused me of that. I was over at helping a close woman friend. Have had this experience several times, and she said, you're never an arts and crafts person, were you? Well, I'm an artist and I'm a composer, but arts and crafts, little fix mechanical things. I manage. I'm better at computers. But anyway, and that's a little bit better. But that's possible, very limited and silly, part object men, part object male components of a relationship. For the man, the part object may be mother. For many men are looking for a good lover for their children. The whole procreation, progeny thing is extremely important for them, and I don't put that down. I wish I'd done it. But they said they weren't interested, so it's next lifetime. Another concept that the man may have of, a lot of women, we talked about this, a lot of men rather, we talked about this before, want a mother replacement. And they want a caretaker, who's very, very good. They want someone who keeps house in a very broad definition of keeping house. The house looks good, it's very presentable. They can bring their friends over. He can bring his business associates over. She looks good for purposes of being with business associates. That kind of thing. I mentioned she's a good mother. She's good at those, household engineering tasks. She fits the image that his social circle has, his compatriots have of a good wife for his type of whatever he is. We talk about, we can talk about characters in films in terms of a part object. There's a film that if every time I recommend films, beware, because I'm really weird. I may recommend Lars von Trier or Bruno Dumont or somebody like that, and you're gonna throw a lemon pie at me. You're gonna not like me. But I really like David Lynch's Twin Peaks reboot, and there's a wonderful character in that called Dougie Smith, and Dougie sells insurance, and that's what he does. And he has a wife and a child, little Dougie. What's he called in that? I don't know. And that's who he is, his persona. He wanders into the office and has meetings about insurance, whatever. But maybe there's another Dougie under the surface, It's like Agent Dale Cooper, FBI agent, mysterious. Maybe the Dale Cooper character is split into the it is interesting, by the way, analysis of part objects. Dale Cooper is FBI agent. Dale Cooper is as crook and criminal in that particular reboot of Twin Peaks. Let's go back, though, to the notion of who we are or our dreams. The woman, the wife in the partnership, what does she see herself as? What is important to her spirit and her soul, in her being, to her identity, to her aspirations, to her creativity, to her self-expression? She could be a ceramicist. If I ever learned to say that word, that's what she could be. She could be a novelist, a writer. She could have an aspiration for a whole different career or education. Perhaps she wishes to become an architect after the kids, if there are kids, reach a certain age. Her aspirations could be to go into politics, and she's playing with it a little bit at the moment, but she's kind of serious. She maybe wants to get on the county central committee. She wants not just to work for a candidate as a cheerleader. She wants to get involved in formulating that candidate's policies, and maybe one day she will be a candidate for something herself because she's a natural-born leader. We talked about how bad it is to call people leaders before, and it was once good to call Hitler a leader. But there are people, many women in life really have. It's much better now than it used to be. Can be amazing leaders and should be amazing leaders and should be encouraged to be amazing leaders by their male or female significant others. That's a woman's dream, that her mate should not only recognize, but foster, nourish, encourage. And when the husband, the mate, the male member of the team, of the partnership, is involved in a sensuous kind of situation, lovemaking, proto-lovemaking, I want to call it erotic, whatever these words are, with her, he should be relating to that whole person, the entire person, which includes those dreams and aspirations, because those are at the heart and at the core of what one's lover is. And if one has not let those dreams and aspirations and creative impulses out of oneself, then it is the lover's job, in my opinion, and maybe it's too big a job for some of us, to help one's lover, one's partner, one's significant other, to let those things out. We talked about last time about cliches and about standard plot lines and how they encapsulate us. We talked in another episode about roles. Let's be creative in our lives. I'm going to talk about this in another way later in today's little falderall. The other thing I want to bring up is the word tenderness, which we haven't brought up before, and it shocks me. I feel guilty. Not that I'm the sort of guy who feels guilty. But the thing about tenderness is there's a tenderness in what do we mean by tender. It's a very relaxed mode. It's in a certain way, it's sort of a quiet mode. It's not like, grabbing the other person's genitals in such a way that is supposed to turn the other person on, but is really supposed to turn you on. I'm talking, I guess, mainly about men, about what men do. The way that they feel women up, and and even in lovemaking with their partners, it's all about them, And for example, I'll talk for a second about oral sex. Having oral sex with a woman, and I mean giving, as they'd say, oral sex to a woman, is an immensely pleasurable and creative experience. It's this amazing feeling of partnership, where it's like it's like a jazz improvisation, right? Where one player is the pianist and the other player plays tenor sax, and they trade roles, back and forth, and a little riff on the piano, and the piano feels and hears the saxophone player picking up on that riff and taking it somewhere, and then the pianist plays another riff, and the woman with her clitoris and her vagina and her entire body, picks up on that riff and feels that riff and riffs its own. It's really like a big, and the way that the musical pieces go through various byways and build to a, climax, and maybe the climax occurs in the form of oral sex, or maybe it becomes, penetration, but that's like a couple of other, musicians join the band at that point, the drummer and bass player join the band, trombone, trumpet player joins the band. But tenderness is a kind of way in. Oral sex begins with a lot of tenderness. If you're going to, skip that, and you shouldn't skip that. You should do, a whole lot of stuff before there's penetration sex, and you can get, that's where you get real creative. If you're a man, or if you are a woman, this is the creative part of it out there. And if you don't know that, talk to your lover. They'll help you. Even if they haven't, had a whole lot of experience, they know their bodies. They know what gives them pleasure. They know what excites them. They know what increases their heartbeat and their rate of breath, etc. So that is tenderness, and how important it is for purposes of everything about a relationship, everything about sensuality, from the most day-to-day interaction with one's lover, significant other, mate, to actual lovemaking leading up to orgasm, if that's what is going to happen in that particular encounter. The other thing, everything for me goes back to music, and you characters may get annoyed by that because I start talking about things about music that may not be your thing. But I don't know. Music. Who do I have a very good female friend for many years who doesn't like male singers, male songwriters, and I'm kind of the opposite. I really like, especially the ones who have come up during the last 20 or 25 years, and I don't go way back to people like Joni Mitchell, Judy Collins, and those people I guess are kind of okay. Of course, Aretha's always going to shake you, but she's another kind of a deal in terms of being a lyricist. But really like P.J. Harvey, who's around 51, and she keeps really doing the good stuff. She never stays in the same rut. Never stays in a rut. She's always doing something different and challenging. And her lyrics are amazing. Another artist I really like is Tori Amos. Same thing. I guess she's maybe a few years older. I don't know, but she's done a wide range of things in music. From her first album, Why Tori Can't Read, which was her sort of disco album, and Y, the letter Y, Tori, T-O-R-I, Kant, spelled K-A-N-T, like the philosopher Kant, and then read. And the source of that was that when she was at conservatory at the Peabody in Baltimore, she wasn't good at sight reading music. You're supposed to sit down and play Stockhausen or Brian Ferneyhough without ever having studied the piece or learned the piece. You just sight read, sit there at the piano and just blah 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 blah. So she's figured out she wasn't going to do this. She couldn't do that so well. So she formed a band. But that, I like that album, Why Tori Can't Read. If you haven't heard it, listen to it. It's tough, strong stuff, good stuff, danceable stuff. But then she made Little Earthquakes, her second album, and everything after that, man. Everything after that. So just dig it if you haven't done it. You haven't dug it yet. Got bands. What do I like with bands? Like the Stop with Camel. And let me think. Well, then there's the Stop with Camel. Yeah, they're good. And then there's the Stop with Camel. That's about it. But back to music. In Western classical music, it used to be with, let's take Mozart as an example. Everything was very tonal. Everything was in a certain key, A or D or G flat minor. Small joke for or C flat minor, which is actually B minor, but C is B flat. No, wait a minute, I'm getting everything wrong. C flat is B. That's your music lesson for today. But then what began to happen with composers like Anton Bruckner, sort of a favorite of mine, and then Gustav Mahler, is they started experimenting with chromaticism, which means, I'm going to give you an example. When I first started studying piano, first little exercise, you look at a page of music, and it's here the notes are on the page, and you play them one hand at a time. And let me sing one. C, D, E, C, D, E, oh, how happy we can be. And the left hand comes in. C, B, A, C, B, A, that's how wonderful it's gonna be our day. Oh, dear. So that gets kind of boring. And, Western classical, and then there's minor keys, and the music would shift in a given piece, major, go to minor for a little while, and go back to major, and all wraps up. But then composers like Bruckner and Mahler, and after him, my personal favorite, Arnold Schoenberg, would experiment more with what this is, which is called chromaticism, which is nothing but using the black keys more, to speak in a very superficial way. So, using the black keys, playing with the black keys, you begin to get an entirely different kind of music, a music that can have more subtlety and nuance, that breaks away from your standard harmonies, your standard triads of harmonies that we're all so used to. And that's, the pop music, we're used to them, and classical music, we're used to them. It's just the standard sort of stuff. So you get all kinds of different chords. And then instead of music playing scales up and down the keyboard, some pop groups do that. I remember the Grateful Dead always do that. I'm never a big fan of the Grateful Dead. They just played scales. What am I here for? Svatoslav Richter plays a scale on his piano better than Jerry Garcia does on his guitar. See, I've turned a bunch of you guys off already by saying that. But the black keys of the emotions are the subtle keys. It's the way that we can make, if not new melody, the whole notion of a melody is confining because melody has boundaries. And then it goes, we always expect the melody, if it starts on C, it ends on C. That's the whole idea of pop music, folk music, Western classical music, of the entire, sort of Western sphere of music. But why not, instead of thinking of scales and melodies, why don't we think of what Arnold Schoenberg called continuous variation? You begin, and then the music travels. It begins with a series of notes, and it keeps going. And what's going on varies continuously. It feels under no constraint or obligation to return to that tonic note. Which strikes me as and what does this have to do with life? It has to do, again, with subtlety and nuance. It has to do with the lack of a feeling that any given event between lovers has to begin and end the same way. Things should always begin, or often begin and end, in different ways, in new ways. Are we discovering things that we want to, go back to? Well, yeah, sometimes. It's part of creativity. But, not always. We have to be open to the concept of discovery, of building and becoming anew, going back again to honoring our beloved's dreams and what is most important to them. So I'm going to experiment with alt-tabbing. Wish me luck. Okay, so Sigmund Freud said something which I think is extremely important, which I'm going to honor by putting on my glasses to make sure that I get it right. How bold one gets when one is sure of being loved. How bold one gets when one is sure of being loved. When I think about this wise statement, I realize how important it is for each of us to realize and appreciate that we are loved. And not only by those with whom we use the word love, but by others in different ways. I began today with an interaction by email with a person who's thousands of miles away, let's say, and thanking me for my love, which is expressed in a certain ways, and giving me her love in return. And the expression, it made my day, but it made me feel bold about myself and about living. And it also makes me think about how bold we can be in life if we open ourselves fully to the love that's all around us amongst our friends, our business associates, our significant others, loved ones, for those who are close to their families, of course, for those who are, and for those who found altered compatriots amongst ones people to whom one is related biologically. But the more we allow ourselves to feel loved by our significant others and by our friends and whatever, the more that we can open ourselves up to loving ourselves. And loving ourselves gives us a whole different spectrum of boldness. By boldness, I don't mean aggressiveness. I don't mean assertiveness, like in that kind of a way. It means the boldness of one's ambition, the boldness of one's words and statements, the boldness of one's expression, the boldness of one's creativity, the boldness of one's love for one's significant other, the boldness of one's love for oneself, the boldness of one's dreams. Be bold in your dreams. Be bold to make your dreams, as they'd say, come true. Simply a rather odd expression. Dreams are true to begin with. They're dreams in your head, and they're true already. The important thing is to actualize things in your dreams that are going to give you greater fulfillment in life, greater creativity, that are going to fuel, wrong word, that are going to nourish your relationship, if you have one with a lover or a mate or significant other. So, we've spoken about any number of issues in this series. One thing that struck me, and I think, and I'm almost positive that somebody who watches this is going to come back and say, you don't talk about spirituality, and I'm upset by that, because if you're going to talk about love, and if you're going to talk about sensuality, you got to talk about spirituality, because if you're not talking about spirituality, you just don't get it. Well, this takes us back to episode number 1, in which I'm not even going to recap that. I'm going to say it very, 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 very quickly. In episode 1, we discussed the whole notion of the mind-body duality, which is basically, Western philosophy essentially took us down that road, beginning with Plato, wanders all the way up through to Rene Descartes and the whole, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, and somehow the mind is pure, the mind is spiritual, the body is somehow impure, I'm sorry, the body is somehow not spiritual and can never be as spiritual, because perhaps you think that, the body is something that links us to God, and the body is kind of an inconvenience in that process of linking oneself to God. It's not the key part or component. Well, that Cartesian stuff, that dualism that Daniel Dennett and others fairly recently have been railing against, this, I think he wrote a book called Descartes' Error. That the mind and the body are really not separate. Talk about spirituality, we also talked about the philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who said whenever he was talking about God, he never talked about God. When he was talking about nature, he never talked about nature alone, separately. He always talked about Deus, sive natura, God, or nature. Then he says we are part of nature. When he says we are part of nature, he means we are part of God. We are part of God. That's the whole deal. Now, I do like my tea. What do I have for later? Cascone? I think that's Italian. We do like our Italian things and our Italian people here, don't we? But, Cassone? Something like that. It's Tuscan in some ways. 2013, not a bad year. At your local Trader Joe's, or at least at mine. But anyway, that's for later. And I've gotten kind of off track here. But it really takes us back to the whole idea of the divinity of the body, the divinity, sacred spirituality of who we are. What I was going to say before I interrupted myself was that I'm not one of these people who goes around talking about the one, because in concert with philosophers I was talking about earlier in the first episode, Alain Badiou, Quentin Meillassoux, they want to get rid of this whole idea of finitude, and they want us to be able to grasp the notion of infinity. But if there's already a big one, somehow that implies that, everything is part of a one that already exists, and there's a sort of boundary. And instead of that, infinity is infinite. Philosophers had a hard time thinking about infinity as infinite. Only in the last 10 years we've gotten beyond the idea of talking about the standard model of physics. We've talked about this before, in which there's a vacuum and little events going on, little particles, little tiny particles, and we discover new ones from time to time, quarks and quirks and stuff like that. But now they come along and say, wait a minute, there is no vacuum, there is no void. Everything is filled with space-time atoms that are very, very small, and space-time atoms have an underlying energy, Zitterbewegung, as Schrödinger said, that gives everything energy at the most fundamental level. And this energy becomes masculine energy, feminine energy, creative energy. But to think that everything that you can perceive and conceive that is material has the same kind of energy that we have. We can't split things. It shouldn't split things between the organic and the inorganic. I spoke about this before. Just because there's carbon in it doesn't make it any better than if it just has silicon in it. It all has silicon in it, or molybdenum. In other words, it took me a long time to learn how to say molybdenum, but I think I've mastered it. If I haven't, tell me. So these are some of the things that we've talked about in this series. The idea of breaking out of roles and cliches, which I think is, very important. The idea of creativity, which underlies absolutely everything. When I was in junior high school, I had a teacher, his name was Gene Durrell, and I was in contact with him a little bit during my early college years, but believe it or not. And he said, try to get it right, he said, creativity is not so important because the product of each moment of the creative process is such a gem, but because creativity is the essence of life itself. I'll buy that. I had a good junior high school teacher. People in my class, interesting dudes, people. One of them went on to become a partner with Goldman Sachs. I didn't. Doesn't make me unhappy. So one final toast. I'm toasting you. I'm toasting today tenderness. I'm toasting relating to your partners, your lovers, whole, not just the part object that you happen to be fixated on at the moment, but their dreams, their aspirations, their goals, their creativity. And when you make love to your partner, you're making love to, as we'd say in object relations, the whole object of your lover, the whole being of your lover. Okay, one last toast to you, to love. I look forward to seeing you next time at some point on Explore Ecstatic Sensuality.